President Bush always made sure that I had what I needed. I went into the White House that day to resign, and he said, the president would like to announce you as press secretary on Friday.
To Dana Perino, looking forward to working with you.
Soon after you became White House press secretary, the great financial crisis of 2008 hit.
More than 900 points.
Gamble.
Make any sense?
Proctor's trading at 60. Hearing screaming, buy.
You want me on your side in a crisis.
Dana Perino.
Dana Perino. Dana Perino.
As educated American women, there's really nothing we can't do. We just have to decide what we want to do.
What is up, everyone? Welcome back to Post Run High. I am sitting here today with Dana Perino. Dana is a host at Fox News. She's a former White House press secretary. She's a best-selling author. She's a dog mom to Percy. She's a mentor to many and so much more. Dana, I am so excited to be sitting down with you today.
I'm excited that we're sitting and not running because I'm not a good runner, but also you're so much taller than me. So now I feel like we have a little more of an even playing field.
And it's rare that I'm taller than someone.
Is that right?
Yes. So I love that.
Congratulations on the podcast.
Thank you.
That's great.
Thank you. And thanks so much for being here with me today. It's truly such an honor to sit down and be able to do this with you. So for context, for everybody listening or watching, Dana and I first met several months ago. We were on a walk in Central Park with her dog, Percy. And now we're here in Brooklyn at our studio. And
my third time in Brooklyn.
Today.
I love Brooklyn when I get here, but for me to come to Brooklyn, there's like an event. I went to a Blake Shelton concert here once. And then I tried to find a farmer's market once in Brooklyn, and because I heard it was great, but I don't think I went to the right one.
I was a New York City girl and a Manhattan girl for so many years because I went to college in New York City and I always lived on the Upper West Side. And then I dabbled in a few other areas. And it's so funny that we now live in Dumbo because I probably wouldn't live anywhere else in Brooklyn. As a little girl, I always loved Dumbo. I remember walking here with my mom over the Brooklyn Bridge and coming onto the street that we now live on and saying, this is the most beautiful sight I've ever seen. And it's that street with the beautiful brick buildings and the bridge in the middle. But I will definitely go back to Manhattan at some point.
Well, and that show Younger, I loved. I don't know if you have seen that. Highly recommend. It's with Sutton Foster and Hilary Duff. And then there's another actress. She's kind of famous. She used to be Madonna's makeup artist. Well, I can't think of her name, but it takes place in Manhattan and in Brooklyn. And so it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's like 18 minutes an episode. Highly recommend it.
I need to watch it. I love that. Madonna's makeup artist is now an actress.
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yes.
Well, I'm so excited for today because you guys are not only going to learn all about Dana, but I have a feeling you're going to be able to learn a lot from her. Ever since we met, I have not been able to stop talking about you. Oh. I referenced everybody's like, who's your favorite person that you've had on? You're always one of the top people that I mentioned.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah. And I mean that wholeheartedly. So when I got the call that we were going to be able to sit down, I was so excited. Let's start here. You became a household name back in 2007 when you became the White House press secretary. But before we get to that, I just want you to take us back a little bit and tell us about your childhood and maybe when you first got interested in politics and journalism and current events.
Thanks for the question. I love talking about this. And one of the reasons I wrote my very first book was because of my upbringing. And I wanted young women to know that if you grow up in a rural part of America, you can still do anything that you want, including stay and in your community or go and achieve things. And I was born in Wyoming. I grew up in Wyoming and Colorado. My family on my mom's side were small business owners, and on my dad's side, they ranched. And it was a ranch that my great-grandparents had founded in the late 1800s in Newcastle, Wyoming, which is about 80 miles west of Mount Rushmore. And if you know Devil's Tower, it's right by there. And I really identify a lot with the ranch because we weren't a family that went on huge ski trips. I never went to Europe on family vacations. We went to the ranch. That was what we did for our spring break, summer break, Christmas break, Thanksgiving, Easter. That's where we wanted to be. My grandparents were hugely influential in my life. My grandfather was a county commissioner. My grandmother was a nurse, but they had a wonderful love story. My grandfather was serving in the Marines in World War II in the Pacific. He was able to get home and the war ends. He comes and he goes through the Panama Canal up into Pennsylvania, into Philadelphia. My grandmother had grown up in New Jersey. Both of them had friends who said, we want to set you up on a blind date tonight. And both of them said, there is no way I'm going on this blind date. But they did. And 3 months later, my grandmother moved to Wyoming and they shared a great love story. Wonderful role model in terms of a relationship. When I would say that my dad and my mom were voracious news consumers, and we got every newspaper and every magazine. And what was really formative, if I think back, is when I was in 3rd grade, my dad started a tradition with me where I had to read the Rocky Mountain News and the Denver Post before he got home from work. And I had to pick out 2 articles to discuss before dinner. And I think about what I do now, my chance to be on Fox News, anchoring a show, co-hosting The Five, and I love it so much. And I would probably be doing all of that reading even if I wasn't getting paid to. So I did that. I was a gymnast early on when I was a kid, and I played the piano. And at some point, my mom and dad said, you have to make a choice. And I chose gymnastics. That was not a great choice. I was never going to be an Olympic athlete. And when that became clear around puberty, around 13, 14 years old, I joined the speech team. And that made a huge difference for me as well. I went to college on a speech team scholarship. I have a younger sister named Angie. She's my biggest fan. She always has been. Ever since I first learned to read, she was so proud of me, told everybody I could read. And she remains my very dear friend. And my family still ranches in that area. So I feel very lucky to have grown up in that part of the world, but to also have traveled a lot, to have had an opportunity to get a good education, and then live in a lot of different places as well, including Washington, D.C. for a long time, and then now New York, which is amazing.
I love knowing that a Wyoming girl ended up on the East Coast, and you have so much so an East Coast personality.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, that's funny. I really do like the pace of New York. And there was a time when Peter and I thought we might move to South Carolina because it's so beautiful. We thought we would live there. But I had 10 days off in a row one Christmas. And I told Peter on the 5th night, I can't do this yet. Like, I want to be active. And then I started really loving New York. And it's got its problems, believe me, and I'm happy to talk about them. But I also think that the energy for me, where I am in my life right now, this is the best place.
I feel the same way. I could not leave New York City, at least right now, while I have a career. I just feel like it's the best place to be, and there's so many interesting people here. But I know you also love escaping the city, right? And going out to New Jersey, which I love knowing that you've gone back to your roots a little bit with your grandma being from there.
When I first moved here, I didn't understand when my now CEO said to me, you need to have a summer plan. I was like, who can afford, what are you talking about? A summer plan? What does that mean? Now I understand that the city is so much during the week that you have to have the weekend to regroup. So we have stumbled upon a community called Bayhead, New Jersey. It is a special place with great people who have worked very hard to achieve having a home or a second home there. But I love the teachers. I love the police officers, the firemen. These are like all of my people. I love it in the winter. Of course, the summer is fun too when everybody's there, but it has been a place that's great. But what's really great about it for my husband is his dad was in the Royal Air Force and he moved around a lot. He was an international businessman, still is, moved around a lot. Where we live in Bayhead is his 44th home address. And that's where he wants to be. So I feel like we finally found where we're supposed to be.
Yeah. You're like, after years of traveling around, moving to different cities, we are in our spot,
This
which
is where we're gonna
we
be.
love knowing that it's Jersey. I'm a Jersey girl, so I love that. I also love knowing that your family has clearly had such a big influence on you. And I really like talking about grit, especially with people like yourself. You've achieved so much. You have to have a certain level of grit to have gotten to where you've gotten. What influence do you feel like your upbringing had on your grit?
That's a great question. I think that certainly in the western part of the United States, there is a tradition of resilience and independence and also humility. I was not somebody who grew up thinking, oh, it'll be no problem if I don't have a job because my parents will pay my bills. I know that's very unusual for most people. That is a very small fraction of the country that can live like that. So I always wanted to be independent. I knew I wanted to achieve a lot quickly. I do regret, and I write about this in Everything Will Be Okay, that I really worried away most of my 20s because I was trying to think of, well, what's next? How can I get ahead? How can I do this? I would pay my student loan bill 3 months in advance because I was afraid for some reason that all of a sudden I would have no money, and that financial insecurity kind of drove me a little bit. But I did have ambition. Like I wanted to achieve things. And yet there's another part of my upbringing that is interesting. I mentioned about humility. It's not that you can't be confident. You can be confident, but you should never be too big for your britches. And that is something I keep with me all the time. I think about that. And sometimes I think it is hard to then discuss your own grit, right? I'd rather talk about somebody else's. And when I was the deputy press secretary and press secretary, we were dealing with some pretty tough issues, like any presidency does. Every presidency does. And I realized I actually didn't cry
Wow.
at the terrible news, the tough news, that I was really good in a crisis. I cried twice at the podium. I teared up when I had to announce that Tony Snow, the late press secretary, when his cancer had returned.
Yeah.
And then I cried one other time, got teary-eyed only at something that was sweet, something that was lovely and an achievement. But if it was bad news, like I can rise to the occasion and I can handle that. And you want me on your side in a crisis, I can be very calm. I did, however, feel like the experience made me a little bit more hard-edged than my natural state of being. And I had to learn how to wipe that away a little bit after I left.
And it's so funny that you say that because I was watching a bunch of your old
Oh gosh.
press
I
moments.
I could never watch it.
But you were so sweet and so many comments that she's America's sweetheart.
Oh.
Like people just loved you.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you say you got so hardened, but you were always so gracious, and it's amazing.
I think there was something about that. Like my grandfather would taught me, to be poised, to be gracious, and to never let them see you sweat. That was something that I always thought about, was that would President Bush be proud of me and agree and appreciate how I am representing him right now? And if the answer was no, in my gut, I didn't say it. Because I could be funny, I could be sarcastic. The easiest thing you can do when you're in a position of power like that is be mean. But I could have said to a reporter, that's the stupidest question I've ever heard. Where in the world did you get that idea? But I would just keep it to myself, and swallow that, save it for maybe later and be like, can you believe he asked that question? But also I was too busy in that regard. And I never wanted, and still don't, ever want to look myself in the mirror and not be able to be proud of being myself. Sometimes that's not easy. Sometimes you have to walk a line. But when I left on January 20th, 2009, we went to the airport and we'd said goodbye to President Bush. We were on our way to Africa. We were going to do 2 weeks safari and 2 weeks volunteer work at a faith-based site. And I leaned my head back and I said, nothing I do for the rest of my life will ever be that important or that hard. And right before Caroline Leavitt, the new press secretary, took over, we had dinner, and she's also had watched several of my briefings, and I thought, oh my gosh, that must have been terrible. But I'm glad that it stands up to the test of time.
There are so few people that will share that same experience as you had. And it's cool knowing that you were able to sit down with Caroline and talk to her, and I'm sure give her advice. And I want to get to the advice that maybe you've shared with Caroline and advice that you would have for future press secretaries as well. But first I want to ask, before you stepped up to the podium, was there something that you had to do, maybe a ritual to calm yourself down and be able to be so gracious when you were on camera?
Well, the most important thing I could ever do was to be 100% prepared. There is, this is going to sound like a cliche, but there is knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. And I have tried every single shortcut to try to be faster in my prep. There is no shortcut. You have to do the reading. You have to do the listening. Listening is an undervalued skill in leadership and in terms of attention span. A lot of people now, especially younger people, but older people too, our phones have shortened our attention span. It's a problem. Overall for our lives, it's a problem. But I would say that was the most important thing that I could do. Do the reading, do the listening, and ask the right questions. I'm not a lawyer. I did spend about 10 months at the Justice Department as a spokesperson. That helped a lot. And there was a general counsel at the White House. At one point, she said, "You were the best non-lawyer in the White House." Well, one of the reasons is that when you were the White House press secretary, I would say 90% of the questions you get have some sort of legal component. You're either being sued or you're suing somebody else or you're trying to pass a law. It's all legally based. And I would say for me now, the key is ask the right questions. Get to what is the issue. And usually that's the toughest knot to untangle.
It is. And it's the toughest thing also to figure out. And I feel like you learn it by doing your preparation. And also, as we were talking about before this, getting your reps in. One of the quotes that I have on my bulletin board over there that somebody said to me during an interview was specific questions, get specific answers.
Yes.
And sometimes when I'm doing my interview prep, I read over a question and I say to myself, is that too broad? Where are they going to take it if I ask that question? Or it's more about active listening, but it's the way you propose a question has to be right.
Yes. And also, I think, especially for your podcast, which people want to listen to because they're going to learn something and they're going to be maybe entertained, learn something they didn't know, hear something that can add to their life. It's that what I try to do also is set the other person up for success.
Right.
Right? Don't say, so how's it going? But like, how is your morning prep today or something? I mean, something more specific. I see what you mean. And so you're trying to say like, I'm paying attention to you and I'm looking you in the eye. And that's why I think the podcast for you is very interesting because your future is so exceedingly bright, but then people can see you rather than just listen. Or if you're running, it's not necessarily being able to see the intention that you bring to every interview that I can see it and feel it now. So that's what I also try to do on America's Newsroom, which is when the interview starts, like I don't pay attention to anything else.
You can't.
No.
I was talking to Lindsay Davis about this, but she also said that so much of interviewing and being a journalist is having a lot of empathy. You have to have empathy when you're talking to people as well to facilitate great conversations and be able to really connect.
Yeah, I would say there was one time I actually cried, got teary-eyed at Fox, and it was because I was interviewing a woman who had been a victim of domestic violence. She had a restraining order against her ex-husband. She had 2 children. And it was about bail and cashless bail. This guy had gotten out, had come to her house, and he had killed her older child, and he thought he killed the younger child and her. They both lived. And she was going to testify about how cashless bail was a problem in Chicago. So I'm about to interview her, and I'm fine. I'm like organized. And then in my ear, right before the interview, they said it would have been his 5th birthday today. And I could not get that out of my head and listening to her. And I remember my producer, Matt Shivani, great guy, in my ear, he said, "You're okay." And sometimes you just need to be reminded like, okay, yes, I am okay. And I'm here to do a professional job, but that doesn't mean you don't have a heart.
I love knowing that you guys have somebody in your ear to be able to remind you of those things because that does help.
It's
much.
very rare.
Yeah.
It's usually rap.
Right.
Because you have to stop. But every once in a while, it'll be like, you're all right. And it happened in the Afghanistan withdrawal too, when we interviewed a guy who should have been in America. He had helped us as an interpreter. He had the right to be here. He was there at Abbey Gate when that bomb went off. He was cradling a 5-year-old child who died in his arms. And he did an interview with us and he said, well, now I know I'm going to die. And that was a lot. He did live, actually. He's now living in Brazil with his family, which is great.
Wow. You've been able to cover some incredible stories, so many over the past, several years. You were so focused at such a young age on knowing what you wanted to do. And you've said, I always wanted to work in politics. Was there ever a woman in the news for you that you saw in the media and you said to yourself, oh, I want to do that. I want to be like her.
Well, I definitely wanted to be a local news anchor. And it's interesting. I was just in San Angelo, Texas, small market, but the woman, Carolyn McEnroe is her name. She's the main anchor there. And she grew up there. She went and she worked in Baltimore and bigger markets, but she came home and she's their anchor there. She's old school. I love her. She is great. And there was a woman named Paula Woodward in Colorado. Denver had great local news when I was growing up. Fantastic local news. I would also say that Paula Zahn, certainly for me early on, Bree Walker. So there's a saying in mentoring, you have to see her to be her. So it's one of those things that's important for take your kid to work day. I think this is probably true for boys as well. It's that, oh, she's an astronaut? Like I could be an astronaut? Or she is a news anchor? I could do that. Oh, she's the White House press secretary? I could do that. And it gives people little ideas along the way. So I also had ambition to be like a local news anchor. I took the circuitous route to getting to do national news, and all of those experiences built on themselves. And so in the books I've written, one of the things I remind people is that you can have as many plans, and you should have ideas and goals. But if you are so worried about getting that one specific plan done, you're going to end up disappointed because you're not in charge of this.
Right. Was there ever a job or internship that you had that you realized, oh, this is not what I want to do?
Absolutely.
What was it?
Absolutely. I worked for a deputy mayor in San Diego. I had met my husband on an airplane. I moved to England. We come back to America. We're living in San Diego. There weren't many jobs going. I took a job as a press secretary for a city councilman, and San Diego is a pretty big market. About 4 weeks into it, I said to my husband, I think this guy could get indicted. There was some funny business going on. And then a family member of mine died a couple weeks later. I'd only been working there for 6 weeks. And we were on our flight back. And I said to Peter, I don't want to have to go back there tomorrow, but I have to go back tomorrow. And he said, you can quit that job. You know that, right? I said, well, how could I? We had just moved back to America. I was the only one with a paying job at the time because Peter was starting a business. We had borrowed money to get a 1-bedroom apartment and a vehicle. We had a 4-month-old puppy. We look back on those times, though, when we had literally very little. But my husband said, you can leave. And I went in and I resigned. And they were like, well, how long do we have you? Another month? And I said, oh, no. He almost did get indicted. He was able to get the charges dropped, but it was something silly. It was like utilizing city workers to do campaign work, something like that. But at the time, I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. But he was not a good person, not a nice person. I didn't want to be around him. And I have been very fortunate to have great jobs at a great place. Like working for the White House was amazing. And being at Fox has been incredible. The opportunities it's provided me, the colleagues that are like family. The culture is great. Plus, I work at a place where I can say and do anything I want. I have so much independence, and a lot of responsibility is on me. I have to do a good job. Like they will back me up, but I'll have to do the work. There's no shortcuts.
And I love that you just mentioned your colleagues, because in your book that's launching this month, I loved seeing so many of your Fox colleagues referenced in the book and quoted in the
I
book.
loved writing the bios for each of them. I took great care. Somebody wrote today that I wrote them with great affection, and I really did.
Yeah. Absolutely. Let's talk about this, because I feel like for so many people, especially in their young 20s and late 20s, it's hard to know. And I always talk about the power of the pivot, but it's so hard to know when it's time to leave a job or when a job is no longer serving you. But my dad always says it to me. And I remember when I was working in advertising, which I had worked so hard to get these advertising jobs when I was in college. I was doing internships. I was taking night classes. I graduated early so that I could start working and start paying off my student loans. And I remember saying to my dad, I started this running interview show. It's going really well, and I think I'm gonna leave my job. And he was like, "You're not leaving your job until you move from a position of strength and you have something else, or you know this thing is really going well for you." So I'm curious, what would be your advice to people that say to you, "Okay, I think I really want to leave my job"?
So in the new book, I do ask a lot of different people this question. And one of my colleagues, Trey Gowdy, has written what I think is one of the best books on decision making. And it's called Start, Stay, or Leave. And he writes about the possibility of leaving as a prosecutor at one point. And it just didn't feel right to him. But when he was ready to leave Congress, it felt right to leave. I believe that you need to be in a place of growth, and especially if you're in your 20s, right? There is a tendency to want to move on too quickly because you do learn fast and you have ambition and things are expensive, so you want the next job. But you have to really ask yourself, is there anything I can do to be better at this job today than I was yesterday? Is there anything more for me to learn? If the answer is no, and you're honest about it, then the answer is probably you should try to look for the opportunity to move up within the company or to move on. Another reason to move on would be if you are uncomfortable, if you think it's an unethical situation. I just saw this thing on Overheard New York. Somebody saying, well, what we're doing is not illegal. I mean, it's a little shady, but it's not illegal. Like, yeah, if that's your situation, you probably want to leave. But there's also this. A friend of mine who worked in the Biden administration, she said that she'd been given this opportunity to leave the Biden vice presidential office to go to the State Department. And she said, well, why would I ever do that? I love this job. And she went to see a girlfriend. She goes, can you believe this? They want me to leave the vice president's office and go work there. And her friend said, when you think about your job today, do you feel like you are just above water? Like, are you about to drown every day? She goes, oh God, no, this job's so easy. She goes, then you have to leave.
On this topic, in your book, and the good news is and by the way, guys, if you're loving this conversation with Dana, just go pick up one of her books because you'll be able to feel like you're having a direct conversation with her and learning all about her experiences in her books. In your book, you talked about the day that you were presented the job as press secretary of the United States.
It's a great story.
And it might have been a day that you wanted to throw in the towel.
I went into the White House that day to resign. There was about 18 months left in the presidency. I was the deputy. I'd been the deputy for a long time. And these are, 18-hour days. And I was physically feeling a little run down, but also I knew I wasn't going to move up. And I didn't come from money, and I needed to figure out, is there a way that I can establish myself at some sort of, either PR firm or something where I can have a foothold on the next part of my career. And Peter and I talked about it. He went on one of these races. You've probably done these 24-hour races that you do with a team.
Right?
Yes, hood to coast. That's what it was.
When I heard that he did that, I was like, we're going to need to interview Peter because
Peter's the best interview. He's great.
Peter's a runner. That'd be amazing.
He's got great stories, and he's been my biggest supporter. And before we leave, I'll give everybody my very favorite piece of advice has to do with him. But Peter and I decided that it made sense, even though I didn't really want to leave the White House, but it made sense because they were saying, if you don't have fresh legs to finish this race, you're going to have to make the hard decision and leave. So I went into the White House that day and I saw Ed Gillespie. He was a director of communications. And I said, hey, Ed, can I see you after the communications meeting? And he says, yes, I need to talk to you too. I said, great. Okay. And I'm dreading it. Go to the communications meeting. It ends. And Ed says, Dana, can you stay? Yeah, sure. So I stay behind. I'm sure everybody was thinking I was in trouble or there's something else big going on. And we sit down and I'm about to just blurt it out to just rip the Band-Aid off. And he said, do you mind if I go first? And I said, okay, yeah, sure. And I sat back and he said, the president would like to announce you as press secretary on Friday.
Wow.
And I said, I knew my life had changed in an instant. And I said, great. Now, Ed did not know that story until he read my book. And he called me. He said, I cannot believe that. Imagine if I had gone first.
I was just going to say that.
And that's what I'm saying about the plan. My plan was to go in and resign. And then I was going to get a job at a PR agency. And then everything was, and And that was not the plan. And then he said, and also you have to plan a secret trip to Iraq. We're leaving Friday night. I'm like, and when that happens, the press secretary does all the work. So I went downstairs and I called Peter and I was like, he said, how did it go? I said, well, and he said, congratulations, my darling. He was so happy.
Oh my goodness. I was going to say, did you accept the job before calling Peter and telling him?
Yes, of course. And then, but that happened again. Years later, I was a contributor at Fox and I did a couple other things. I was on the broadcasting board of governors under Barack Obama. I'd just been to Africa. I was at Dulles Airport at baggage claim when I got a call from Fox saying, hey, I know this is going to disrupt your summer, but would you mind coming up to New York and doing this temporary show called The Five? It's going to be for 5 to 6 weeks. That's it. We just need to fill this gap until we figure out what's going on there. And would you mind coming up and doing the show called The Five? And I thought, my summer's ruined. I have to go to live in middle of Manhattan for a summer. This is terrible. And I called Peter. He was in Korea on business. And I said, Peter, you're not going to believe this. And he said, congratulations, my darling. So I said again. I was like, what? And he said, this is what you always wanted to do. And we're about to have our 14th anniversary this July for The Five.
I also love that you reference Peter, and I want to talk about this really quickly because this is another thing that you mentioned in that book, and you also said it to me on our walk when I asked you a quote that you live by, and it is, choosing to be loved is not a career limiting decision.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
Peter ended up being,
Mhm.
and throughout your entire career has been one of your
The
biggest
reason,
supporters, right?
So we met on an airplane. He's 18 years older than me. He lived in England at the time. We didn't have cell phones. This is 1997, and we didn't have AirPods. We had hard copy books, And I asked him about his book, and we started talking. And immediately I was like, "Oh my gosh!" Well, first of all, he has a British accent, so that helps. And don't lose
Always.
it, Peter. But I had a pretty good career trajectory for me at the time. I was a House press secretary for a pretty high up member of Congress. Wasn't quite in leadership, but he was a senior guy. I had good friends, Ed Gillespie being one of them, who worked on the Hill at the time. And I thought, first of all, when I left local TV and went to Capitol Hill, I thought, wow, I'm never going to get to work in TV again. Thinking about moving to England to be with Peter, I thought, well, there goes my career. Everything I've worked for, it's gone. Of course, none of that turns out to be true. But I went home to Colorado, and it was Christmas time, and a family friend took me aside, and she goes, "So what's going on?" Because he was there. And I was like, "Oh, no, I don't know." Because and I was so worried about what everybody else would think. I'm like, he's 18 years older than me. He has 2 kids. I was 25 years old. People are going to think I'm crazy and impulsive. And she said, "Don't give up on this chance to be loved. It might not ever happen again." And she goes, "Why do you care what other people think?" And another thing I say in these books is that everyone thinks that everyone else is thinking about them. It's never true. Everyone is only ever thinking about themselves, like including me. Like it happened. I am like, we are empathetic, but also when somebody says, "Oh, guess what? I'm having a baby," and they work for you, the first thing you thought is, "Oh gosh, now who's going to do her job?" Right? Like it happens. It's just natural. And when I was so nervous to tell my parents I was moving to England, I could not believe it. I worked myself up into the worst anxiety. I call my parents and I tell them, and they go, "This is great." All that worry for nothing. And I look back and I think, if I had given up on that chance to have this amazing 27-year marriage with Peter, I actually look back and like, one, none of it would have been fun or worth it. But I also don't think I could have done it without him.
I mean, having a supportive partner in your life really is such a game changer, especially when you're in a job like being the press secretary of the United States. And I just have to shout this out really quickly, but Dana was the second female press secretary of the United States ever, and the first ever Republican press secretary. So we talked a little bit before about the quote that you mentioned was, "You have to see it sometimes to believe it."
One of the other pieces of advice I have is always take the deputy job or the second in command job. Take that job. Love it. It might mean, like for me, that meant you do the job and you work the holidays and the weekends. But that's when I got to know the president. We would show up on a Saturday and it was always all the deputies. And if, let's say he was going to give a graduation speech, we'd walk in like, "Hi, sir, it's the B team." He's like, "Yeah, the best team." We would have so much fun. It was like a little bit more easygoing. But that's when you learn to do the job. And the deputy position is great. I love it. I always tell people to take that job.
For people that don't know, let's talk a little bit about your path to being White House press secretary.
So I moved to England to be with Peter. We moved to San Diego. I'm bored out of my mind. And I went in August of 2001 and said to my friends, "I would love to come back. If something opens up, let me know. I want to work for President Bush, but I work on Capitol Hill. If anything comes up you think is good, let me know." 2 weeks later was the 9/11 attacks. And my girlfriend, Mindy Tucker, worked at the Justice Department. And she called me and said, "Are you still willing to come back to Washington? Even after all of this, I need another spokesperson on my team." And she could trust me. I worked with her on Capitol Hill. And I could pass a background check quickly. And I started packing when we were on the phone. And I was a spokesperson at DOJ for almost a year. And then I got pulled over to the White House Council on Environmental Quality, which was actually back to my roots, because a lot about conservation, land use, farming, agriculture, earth, land, and sky. That was it. So I did that for about 2.5 years. And then I was going to leave. I was going to go to the Social Security Administration to work on that effort at the Treasury Department. And Scott McClellan said, "I'd like to make you my deputy." So I took the deputy job. I was very happy as deputy, very happy as deputy. I like being behind the scenes. I'm still a good staffer. I'm a good producer. I'm a good staffer. But I had to step up when there was no other person to do the job. And that happened to be me.
And on top of that, soon after you became White House press secretary, the great financial crisis of 2008
About
hit.
a year later.
About a
Yeah.
year later.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like stepping up to the podium when you're speaking to a nation of people that are panicked and not only panicked, but also they're going to hang on every word you say? Like, what does preparation for that look like?
It was very interesting because I remember a lot of people before that across the administration, they loved to be on TV. And they would ask did I want them to join the briefing? Could I put them on TV? The financial crisis happens and they were nowhere to be found. There was me. And I didn't come from money. I didn't know what a credit default swap was. Turns out nobody else did either. But what I did know was this, that the president was principled in his decision-making. I was there for all of the meetings so I could understand and listen. And what I would say, I remember when Brett Baer, he was the White House reporter at the time, a little bit in the weeds here, but it makes sense in the story. When the president authorized the Treasury Secretary to ask Congress for the money to bail out the banks, that the banks did repay. But when that happened, we called it the Troubled Asset Relief Program, called TARP. People in finance are going to remember this. It passes after a lot of gnashing of teeth, tantrums, everything, but it passes. And I do believe that it helped save people from having to actually panic. There were a lot of people hurt in it. Don't discount that, but fewer than would have been if we hadn't done what we did, or he did, I should say, with the president. So the Troubled Asset Relief Program passes. The next morning, we're at senior staff meeting and they start talking about how they're not going to use the money to buy troubled assets. They're going to give the cash to the bank so that they can do it. And again, you have to ask the right question. I'm like, but isn't it called the Troubled Asset Relief Program? And you're not going to do it? And they kind of give me the runaround. And in the briefing that day, I'll never forget it. And I think this is why people thought that they could trust me. Brett Baer says, but I thought it was called the Troubled Asset Relief Program. And I said, great question, Brett. I asked it myself this morning and I didn't get a good answer. But I'm working on it. And as soon as I have one, I'll try to provide it to you. Because my job wasn't just to spin. My job was to be the liaison and to get it back. And President Bush always made sure that I had what I needed. So when he found out that they were not giving me what I needed, it turned around really quickly.
What is the best piece of advice that you got from President Bush?
To ask yourself, what is the worst thing that could happen? Now, this wasn't happening in the presidency. It was afterwards. I joined a PR firm and I was giving speeches and I was doing this. My favorite thing I did was the Fox contributorship. So I had all of these things happening and I really did not like the PR firm that I was working for. I actually don't like working in PR. I didn't know that. I thought, well, that's natural. This is what press secretaries do. It was just not my scene at all. And I went to see the president on something else. To help him with his book tour. And I walk in and I said, good morning, Mr. President. And he said, what's wrong? And I said, oh, everything's good. He goes, I can tell what's wrong. Sit down.
Wow.
But let's have it. He loves to mentor. That's his favorite thing. So I start to tell him and he says, okay, so let me get this straight. What's the worst thing that could happen if you left the PR firm and started your own agency? What's the worst thing that could happen? I'm like, well, da, 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 da. He goes, okay, so you're telling me you were the White House press secretary. And the worst thing that could happen is you start a PR firm that doesn't work and you have to go work for another PR firm. He goes, that's the worst thing that could happen in your life? It's like, come on. And he really talked about being willing to take a risk and how important that is for all of us as Americans. We are a pioneering, innovative people. And it's one of the reasons we're the most exceptional nation. But you have to be willing to take a risk. So I always I pass that advice on to people, but I also even say it to myself. And Dr. Samantha Boardman, a good person for you to have on this podcast, I think, she has this method where if you're wrestling with something and you're worried about something, she said, in your mind, imagine the very best case scenario and the very worst case scenario. And the truth is, it's not going to be either of those extremes. It's going to be somewhere in the middle, and it can help calm you down.
And it's so true. I feel like our minds have the tendency, especially as people that if you're a perfectionist, you have a perfectionist mindset, you do always go to the extreme. So that is such good
And
advice.
one time, Bill Hemmer, we were interviewing somebody who's hostage family out of Israel. And there had been a video. It was very distressing. And in the pre-interview phase during the commercial break, we have a chance to say hello. And I will never forget, he said something so kind. He said, okay, don't let your imagination get too far ahead. I loved that. If you're worried about your loved one and you're thinking they're in this terrible situation, I mean, in your imagination, you can come up with some horrible scenarios. Let's not go there yet. Okay. And I thought that that was so kind and told him, and I've tried to use it since.
You eventually got into broadcasting. And as we mentioned, you're on one of the most watched shows. So what was it like going from being the press secretary to all of a sudden being a member of the press?
Well, at first I was so reluctant and reticent because on the 5, again, we thought it was a temporary show. So I didn't want to say anything that was going to preclude my ability to have like a presence or a PR firm. I didn't want to say anything. Plus I had clients, so I couldn't talk about gas prices because one of the companies I worked for was an oil company. So once I shed all of that, that was helpful. But also I would say my colleague, Greg Gutfeld, who I interview in the new book because he's got great advice and amazing experiences. Not only is he funny and hugely successful, but he's been through a lot. And that's one of the joys of getting a little bit older, is passing along good advice to younger generations. And I remember one day the topic was legalization of marijuana. Now, this is going back a ways. We've been on the air for 14 years. So I know it's very common now.
Right.
But back then it wasn't. And I'm against it. I'm still against it. And I believe I'm being proven right. But I remember he said, what do you think of it? And I started to give the Bush administration position at the Justice Department. And he goes, no, what do you think? And I was like, me? Who cares what I think? I've never been elected to anything. I don't know. I've always been a spokesperson for somebody else. So we talked about, before, we haven't talked about it yet, but finding your strong voice. Part of that for me was also having to find my strong voice and be confident that I could express my opinions and it would be okay. Fox News gives you that room and confidence to say what you believe, and they back you up.
And you can correct me if you don't think this is right, but I think from watching your briefings to now watching you on Fox, there is such a difference in how you speak and your tone and kind of the confidence behind what you're saying.
I can have fun now.
Yeah.
And I actually remember Brian Kilmeade. I remember Brian Kilmeade one time, he said, wow, I never knew you were funny. I was like, well, I didn't know I could be. You know, I could have like a light moment here or there, but being able to just be my full self that's pretty great. It's pretty great to be that way. And in America, as educated American women, like there's really nothing we can't do. We just have to decide what we want to do.
And Dana and I talked about finding your strong voice on our walk. And it's a quote that has stuck with me ever since. I've been like, well, what is my strong voice? And it's been kind of recently that I've started to figure out what it means to have a strong voice and then almost what it's going to take to get there. And I think that's one of the most important processes and steps in finding that strong voice. But let's break down what you mean by that and maybe the steps that people can take to find it.
So I remember being a press secretary on Capitol Hill, and my chief of staff sent me to a meeting on her behalf. And I came back and she asked me how it went. And she said, oh, did you bring up this point? And I said, I had to admit, no, I didn't. I didn't speak up in the meeting. And she said, I didn't send you there to be a mouse. I sent you there on my behalf. So, and she said, you have to find your strong voice and represent me and the congressman at these meetings. So then I started understanding that a little bit more. And then as I did more mentoring, I started seeing in particular this tendency for young women to either use the vocal fry or the up-talking. And I think it's a mask to hide their lack of confidence. So it's when they talk like this all the time and everything ends in a question, even if it's not. That is so annoying. And what I'm trying to explain to them is it's annoying to people, but it's also going to hold you back career-wise. You're not going to get the job or the chance to travel for the company or be chosen to give the award ceremony speech. You're never going to get the job if you cannot find your strong voice. And it can mean a lot of different things to other people. For example, it starts when, especially girls, when they're young. They have to be able to order their own meal at a restaurant. If women at that age can't ask for what they want to eat for dinner, how are they going to, in the future, ask for what they're worth at a job? It matters if you have to help them when they're young. And then as mentors, we have a responsibility to take someone aside privately. Let's say that they're doing the up talking. They don't even realize they're doing it because all their friends talk that way. So it sounds normal to them. But I'm telling you, I've seen it 3 or 4 times. You gently say something, they can turn it off immediately. And so there's that. But then also at the podium, there would be days when I was nervous, but if I was prepared, I could have a stronger voice. And I always wanted everyone in the briefing room to know that I've read more than everybody in this room. So I know more than all of you. Ask me anything. And have that little confidence. I still had imposter syndrome. I remember one day I went to the briefing room and I think it might have been Peter Baker. He was at the Washington Post at the time, was asking me a question. And I had one of those moments of imposter syndrome where I thought, why are they asking me? Like, what do I know? But all of us have that.
Everybody has it. I was just talking about it in the last interview that I posted with Royan Balzario. She's an incredible actress. And we were talking specifically about imposter syndrome, which she's dealt with throughout her entire career.
Oh, okay.
And she's said Academy Award winning actresses feel this imposter syndrome when, they're incredible at their craft. And I loved what she said, and I think you're going to like it too. But she said when it comes to imposter syndrome, you have to feel the fear and do it anyways.
It does help to know that other people feel that way.
Yes.
And Trey Gowdy in this new book, he talks about, and in his book, Start, Stay, or Leave, it talks very openly about how he has lived with anxiety and fear. And he said that what he learned is that you cannot think that fear is going to just totally go away. You can let it ride in the passenger seat. And it'll be there. And you don't have to pretend it's not there, but it's not going to drive. You drive, and it can be there, and you can deal with it. But don't pretend like it's never going to be there, because that actually helps you be a little bit better. I think it's biological, right? So survival of the fittest was really because we used to like run away from animals or something. Now we have different fears, but we all have to figure out a way to deal with them. When you start thinking about the worst case scenarios all the time and letting your imagination run away with you, I believe that's biological. And you can just find ways to harness that. So can you find that ability to take all that energy and to turn it into something positive?
Comes down to preparation, right? And it's like
For me.
Yeah. And I think for so many people too, because I feel like the fear also can translate when you're in school. If anybody's listening to this and you're in college and you've got a midterm coming up, I'm sure that midterm is stressing you out. And then you realize you get a little bit less stressed as you study.
And actually, when I talked about the woman who told me to choose love, there was another woman in my singles group at the church that I went to at the time. And she said, remember in the Bible, it says over and over again, fear not.
Right.
Why do you think it says that?
Right.
Because it's natural to be fearful. And the truth is, you don't have to be fearful. And what I ask young people, or anybody really, but especially younger people that are reading any of the advice I'm giving, it's do not worry your young life away. Enjoy your young life. You're not going to have all the answers right now, and that's great. And it's okay. Like, as long as you're getting up every day, making your bed, getting to work, being a responsible adult, thinking ahead, going out and meeting people. You cannot hide in your room. You cannot do COVID for the rest of your life. You have to go out and meet people. We are social beings, and we have to get past that. Because, for example, I'm only sitting here with you today because I went to a hockey game in 1995.
What do you mean by that?
I was working on Capitol Hill, answering phones for a congressman. We had an opportunity to go to the Colorado Avalanche game. I don't know. I know nothing about sports. You know that. So I got asked if I want to go to this hockey game because it was free. And I was like, oh, I don't know. They said, just come with us. I'm like, okay. And Coors Brewing Company, before the lobbying gift ban, gave all of us tickets on a chartered bus to go to the hockey game. I sat next to a guy named Tim Rutten, and he said, so what do you want to do in DC? I said, oh, I'd love to work my way up to be a House press secretary one day. He goes, oh, do you know Congressman Dan Schaefer? Because his press secretary is leaving. And I said, oh, I know who he is, but I could never. I just got here and I just took the job. I've only been here 6 weeks. It would be so rude of me to look for another job already. And he said, oh, you have no idea how this place works. And he made me meet up with that young woman, Janelle Guerrero. And that's how I got the press secretary job on Capitol Hill. But if I hadn't gone to that hockey game, nobody would have known I existed.
You've been in the media for a while now, and the media landscape is changing. We've got new platforms popping up, and I told somebody that I would ask about this. So I have to ask, you've done an incredible job delving into TikTok and Instagram and just being on social media. What was it, or who was it that encouraged you maybe to get online and do it?
Well, if I think back on January 20th, 2009, when I left the White House, I did not have a Twitter account or a Facebook account. It just really wasn't a thing yet. And an assistant I got in the next year said, would you like me to set up a Twitter account for you? And I said, oh God, no. Who needs that? No. And she goes, I can show you how to post pictures of your dog. And I was like, okay, now you're talking. Let's do it. So then I realized, oh, this is a great place to find out about news or for people to hear what I'm thinking, and especially like with Fox. So then that develops over time. Early on in Twitter, Greg Gutfeld and I started this Twitter war against each other. It was hilarious. At least we thought so. But it gained us so many followers. Instagram becomes a thing. I never really was that big on Facebook. But Instagram I liked. And then fast forward, I knew that younger people were getting news in a different way. And I still want to have access to them. I want them to hear my ideas, my thoughts, my opinions, maybe argue with me, whatever it might be. But there is just so many different ways to communicate. I love it that I'm on the #1 show in all of cable on the 5, and America's Newsroom does incredibly well. All of Fox does great, but I still felt like there were other places. So Fox provided some opportunities, but they also give us leeway to do our own thing. And last year, when there was a change in my assistant, I had said to my new assistant, I nicknamed her TikTok Kate DePietro. I said, one of the things I want to do is have more of a presence on social media. I was doing some, not enough. I was like, there's more I can do here. And I would like you to help me. And so I talk about reverse mentoring a lot, and in a way that doesn't make me feel stupid and doesn't compromise who I am or my integrity, or I would never want to post something inappropriate, or I would never do that. And she has been an incredible partner. And I have been pleasantly surprised, sometimes even shocked, at what an effect it can have and how many people see it and remember it and remember little funny things that we do together. For example, we were on a plane. We took a picture about, where do you think we're going? And I didn't know she had this sweet treat on her lap, the Uncrustable. But everyone saw the wrapper, and it I don't know, it got like 1 million views or something. And it was crazy. And it's not that I want people to know about the Uncrustable. It's that I want them to know, here is somebody in the media who I might be able to relate to and maybe trust and listen to.
Right. And I feel like just by hearing how you speak, it's so important for the younger generation. We talk a lot on social media about the TikTok voice or the social media voice.
I can't take it. That's not the strong voice.
It's not the strong voice.
No.
It's what you referenced before, which is that kind of seesaw tone. So having people like you that speak so eloquently is so important.
And it shows a very healthy and successful mentoring relationship. And I think people like to see that as well. That's that they know I'm learning from her and she's learning from me. We do Gen Z news. This was her idea, TikTok Kate. But it's amazing to me. Like, I will see people, who, even if she's not with me, they're like, how's Kate? And they're getting to know somebody else. But that healthy mentoring relationship is really important for a lot of people to understand and see. And here's the other thing. It's made work more fun. And we could all use a little more fun.
You guys look like you're having so much fun. I have to ask, what is one thing that you've learned from TikTok, Kate, that you didn't expect to learn going into this world of social media?
I learned that Selena Gomez and Justin Bieber dated at some point. I didn't know that. We have some quizzes that we do back and forth. I don't have children of my own. I have a lot of...
you have Percy.
I have Percy, but I have a lot of friends that have children. And now a lot of my friends, especially people I have mentored over the years, now they're having children. And I enjoy being a part of their world and learning about it. And I think what has surprised me too is the breadth and depth of people that are on social media watching. So it can be much younger people, like my friend's 14-year-old daughter who loves TikTok Kate. She wants to know everything about her. And then all the way up to older people who live in Bayhead are like, oh, I love the fashions And it's just given me another way to connect with people in a way that makes me happy, makes them happy. It's a little bit entertainment, it's a little bit lighter. And I think we could all use a little bit of lift.
And it's nice for people to see the behind the scenes of everything you're doing, you know, especially the people that are tuning in every single day to watch you report the news as their trusted news source. It's
I didn't
fun.
think people would want that sort of behind the scenes thing, but they do.
They do, yeah.
So
And I love that you said it is nice for people to see a mentor-mentee relationship.
Absolutely.
And it's also fun knowing that mentorship has been
Yeah.
such a big part of your life. You see it through your writing. We've got a new book coming out, Dana Perino, I Wish Someone Had Told Me. It's incredible. Let's talk about it.
Okay.
What inspired your new book, I Wish Somebody Had Told Me?
a couple of things. So when I wrote Everything Will Be Okay, and that the subtitle is Lessons for Young Women from a Former Young Women, a couple of things happened. One, my mom called me and she said, I wish somebody had told me this. And that stuck with me. So as my mom was part of that generation of women that really paved the way for the rest of us. And they had to do it on their own. There were no mentors. Nobody was doing it. They figured it out, right? So then we get a chance to follow on. Another thing is I had a lot of great feedback from young women saying this really, changed my life. I thought, changed your life. But what they wanted to hear was that you're not the only one that's having these feelings in your quarter life crisis. You're not the only one who's worried about work-life balance or wondering how to get the job or why is it that the guys got the promotion instead of me? Like all of those feelings, it's so normal and everyone was having them. So it was very relatable. But another thing that struck me was how many young men said to me they wish there was something like that for them. Now, nothing's preventing men from writing a mentoring book. In that way, though, it's almost like a bridge too far. So in this book, I don't do it specifically for young women. And I talk about post-COVID work life and work-life balance and everything from starting your career, deciding what to study, deciding what kind of position that you want to go for, what kind of industry you want to work in, all the way up through retirement and the things in between. But what I did in the meantime was, in this goal to do more social media, I started something on foxnews.com called Short Questions with Dana Perino. I'm very short. So Short Questions with Dana Perino was a very scrollable type, sort of like a snackable content. And I would just ask people, what's your favorite app? What's your this? What's your that? And then people loved this thing. And I got kind of bored with the questions. So I started asking, what's the best piece of advice you ever got? What do you wish someone had told you? And I started getting such good answers that I thought it's a shame not to put this in one place. So I feel like this book is the one-stop shopping place for all of those worries and concerns for setting out on your career, or if you are mid-career. I do a lot of interviewing with parents, especially moms, about work-life balance, raising children, having your career, making a choice to maybe not work for a while, come back, all the way up through retirement. I mean, a lot of people are deciding, what am I going to do in retirement? I talked to Stuart Varney. He's one of my colleagues. He's in his mid-70s. He's crushing it every day. And he has asked me for the past 15 years, should I retire? I'm like, do you think you should? Well, not yet. Okay, maybe not yet. So I was able to ask him why. And I got such good answers from a lot of colleagues I work with at Fox, but also people like Dierks Bentley, who's one of my favorite country music singers, and I've become friends with him. And he's done a lot in his career. If you're in entertainment, you deal with a lot of rejection. So I asked, how do you deal with that? How a lot of people are afraid of rejection, so they don't want to risk anything. So it's all just in one place. The other thing is I did one chapter on Dana's do's and don'ts, an updated one on that so that you can get the blunt thing of don't wear Uggs to the office, use your strong voice, things like that, all the way up to things like the chapter where I ask everyone, what's the best advice you ever got?
That's one of my favorite chapters in the book. And you described it so well in the book. So I'm really just going to use your words here.
Okay.
But the book is almost like a ladder where I feel like you can reference it at multiple times throughout your career. It's really not just a book that you can read all the way through and then never come back to. I feel like it is kind of a Bible in a way that when you're at different stages of your career, there's different chapters and different pieces of advice that might speak to you. You said in the book that your favorite question is, what's the best advice you've ever received?
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 8 is you getting advice from some of your closest friends and colleagues. So I'm curious, out of the advice in that chapter, what is the best advice you've received?
It's interesting you say that. So the one that came to mind just now is not something that was actually relevant personally to me, but it is advice that I've been giving to young women in particular. So my friend Michelle Chase, she is an incredible HR person. She's quoted in many places in this. She's a mother of 3. She talks about what it is like for women and what they should do when they have children, if they're going to take some time off of work. She says, always open an LLC, have a consulting business, and do a little something, a little client work here and there. Doesn't have to be much. It could be a lot, whatever it is. Because then when you decide to go back to work, you have something that it looks like you've been doing something. Okay. The reason this matters is a lot of employers, when you come back to work, they'll want to reduce your pay. No, that's not acceptable. They don't know what you've been making. It's not that you've just been doing nothing for 5 years. You've been doing the most important job, raising the next generation, and you're coming back to work because you have something valuable to provide. I think that practical advice for new moms was one of the best pieces of advice I'd ever heard.
And I'm not a mom yet, so I can't speak from experience, but I do know myself, and I feel like I couldn't imagine not being stimulated in some sort of way outside of kid world. I also think from that perspective, it's just healthy, right?
Absolutely.
To always keep something up in some way. Also, I like that you brought up Dierks Bentley because he's the first person, and I like knowing that his name is pronounced Dierks because when I was reading it, it was one of my favorite quotes, and it was the first quote that you listed. And it makes sense that he's a country singer. The quote is, keep flowing, keep creating, don't think too much. Let's go, baby.
Yeah.
And some people, the quotes are very long. His was to the point.
Short.
I love the quote, good is better than perfect. And I think that's so important in so many different walks of life. You know, I'm not a perfect interviewer yet, but maybe one day I will be. And
You'll never be perfect. And also, if you feel like you are, then you're done and bored.
there's a quote that I want to pull out, and I don't want to get it wrong. It's from Bill Hemmer, and the quote is, be humble. My mom always said it. And I just want to compliment you for a second because you truly are one of the most humble people I've ever met. And you have been in rooms that so many people could only dream of being in. So I just want to
Yeah.
thank you so much
Thank you.
for being who you are and gracing our TV screens every day and being here with me now.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, one of the great things about this whole journey has been getting to know other people, and helping others succeed makes you more successful. And so the only thing I've ever asked of anybody that I've given mentoring advice to is to pass it on to the next generation.
I love it. And it's amazing knowing that all while you are building this incredible career for yourself, you're also thinking about other people,
Absolutely. Or else what's the point?
right? What is next for you? We've got this book coming out. When does the book release?
So April 22nd is the day that it comes out. So right before graduation. But as you said, I think it kind of works for everybody. I actually think that this book is good for managers to give to their employees as well, or for managers to read to get advice, because we don't have all the answers. And one of the reasons I interviewed all these people is that I keep getting asked for more mentoring advice, but I don't have all the answers. So I thought, well, who should I ask? I asked the trusted people in my life. My favorite thing at this age and at this point in my career is that I love everything I'm doing. I'm not worried about what's next. I'm not anxious about what's next. The only thing I'm starting to worry about is that I don't have enough time to get it all done. I have some hobbies that I love, some book projects that are underway in my mind, and I just feel like time goes by so fast. And I would buy anybody's extra minutes if I could, but the most bipartisan thing in the world is that we all get the same amount of time every day, and using it wisely is really important.
It's so true. And for a final question, going off of that, knowing what you know now, what would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Not to worry so much. It was pointless. It's not that I had a bad start to my career. I didn't. I just look back and I think how I was so worried about what was next and what I was going to do. And I was trying to plan and try to get ahead and worrying, was I going to pay the bills? And it all worked out the way that it's supposed to. Even if I had never worried, it would have been worked out the way that it was supposed to. So I feel like my friend's advice about fear not is something I wish I would have done, and wore more sunscreen.
Always. Well, thank you so much, Dana.
Thank you.
It's truly such an honor. Everybody, April 22nd, Dana's new book comes out. Get it, keep it in your library, revert back to it. And that's a wrap.
Thanks so much.